Hello there, Michelle Short here for My Favourite Things. Today I have a card to share showing how to bring your eye into a focal point using shape dies. So let's get started. This is the adorable You Make Moo So Happy set. It's so cute. I love these Highland cows, and I'm going to stamp one of them and also one of the flowers and then one of the sentiments I'm using as well. So I've stamped the cow and the flower onto some smooth white cardstock using black ink. And now I'm colouring the cow to start with using some brown Copic markers. And Highland cows are generally kind of like on like a red tone, but I do want some kind of darkness into the image. So I want some lighter areas and some darker areas. And so I am going in with quite dark browns to start with, but I do lighten it up as I go and make it more kind of red toned. So I'm starting off by mapping it out where I think my darkest areas will be using the E49 marker. So I'm kind of going under his hair there and then sort of the sides of his body. I am focusing most of the colour towards the right hand side. I'm then going in with E59 and I'm going over some of the area that I've already gone over. I don't necessarily go over it all. I kind of want the parts sort of on the furthest away to be darker. But I do want to blend the two shades together. So I go over a lot of where I've been, and that just tends to sort of blend the two markers together. And then I pull that colour out further into the image. So just going around the hair here underneath his chin. I'm then bringing in the E39, and this is where the kind of more red toned colours start coming in. So again, going over the areas that I've already been, but not quite as far to the darkest areas, and then pulling that colour more into the image. I can now go in with E99, and this is definitely kind of looks a little bit more like an orange tone. Works really nicely with the other ones. And then my lightest shade here is E97, but there is a fair amount of gap between the E99 and the E97, and I felt on this image it looked a little bit too light. Looking at it now, I don't think it looks as bad as what I thought it did while I was colouring it, but I'm going to go tip to tip with the markers. So this is the E99 that I'm holding in my left hand, and then I'm tipping the tip, holding the tip to the E99 marker of the E97, and that's just going to blend the two shades together. So it's going to make it kind of like a shade in between the E99 and the E97. And then I knew that I'd missed off his ears and then the top of his hair here. So I sometimes like to go in like sections when I'm doing colouring, instead of sort of colouring all of the image in one go. So that's what I did here. So I'm just going back through the same colours of the markers, colouring in the ears and then this hair here. And then for the hair, I am kind of going in a little bit more of a flicking motion with the markers, but I am going to go in with some colour pencil to add kind of like hair strands in. So I wasn't too worried about sort of getting it too sort of looking like hair, I suppose, at that point with the Copic markers. I do find sometimes flicking works really nicely when you've got a larger area, but sometimes when you have smaller areas like this, it is a little bit more difficult to get those lines quite defined. So I'm going in here with a Faber-Castell Polychromo, and this is 2H3 Burnt Sienna, and I'm just kind of going over the area, flicking those kind of hair strands in so it looks more like hair. Technically a Highland cow has got hair all over its body, but I thought it made sense just to have the sort of hairiness on the top of his head, and then the rest of his body looks a little bit smoother. And then I forgot his little tail there. So then for the hooves, I'm using E55. Just adding a little bit on either side of the hooves, kind of like where he's, if he was having arms rather than legs, and then on his legs more towards the right hand side. I felt that that wasn't quite dark enough, so I went in with the E57, blending that out with the E55 again, the E53 and the E51 there for the tops of his horns, and then the little bit there of the hooves as well. And then for his nose, I'm using E04 to start with, going around the outside edges, focusing, like I say, most of the colour towards the right hand side. I'm thinking that's slightly darker, and then also the inside of his ears as well, and then blending that out with the E11, followed by the E01 and then the E000. And then I am just going back in with that E04, making sure that the inside of his nostrils are quite dark, and then I did add a little bit extra towards the bottom of his nose there as well, blending that out with the E01. And then for the flower, I wanted to have it like a sunflower, but this definitely could be any flower. I think a daisy would look really pretty as well, but I thought the sunflower would work quite nicely. So I started off with a base layer of the Y17. I'm now going in with YR27, and because it's so much darker, I do like to add that base layer of the Y17 first. I then blended that out again with the Y17, followed by the Y15 and then the Y13 as my lightest shade. For the inside of the flower, I'm going in with E79. I felt that that wasn't quite dark enough, so I went back to that E49 again, and then blending that out with the E77, followed by the E74. And I think these tones work quite nicely for a sunflower. And then for the stem and the leaves, I went in first with the base layer of the Y17. I'm now going in with G29, blending that out with the YG23. This stem is so thin, I'm being careful here not to go over the lines. And then finish off with the YG01. I'm then taking the coordinating dynamics, and in the stamp set there is a fence, but I decided that I didn't actually want the stamped image of the fence. I just wanted the die cut, so I'm going to die cut that. I tried to sort of make sure that there was an area where I didn't have any Copic marker from the lid of the Copic marker. It does kind of make a little mark on that cardstock. I've then added the coordinating dies around the images, held them down with some low tack tape, and then run that through my die cutting machine. So I've got the fence there and then my images. And I also wanted to cut one like a shape so that I can bring in your eye to the focal point, and I think shape dies work really nicely for this. So this is a frame, which is great because then I can have my image inside. So that is the diamond frame dynamics, and I've cut that from the same white cardstock, and I just cut an extra fence piece as well so that I can stack those up. And then off camera I also cut another 2 of those diamond frames again. Again, I'm going to stack them up to create a little bit of dimension on my card. So I'm just kind of figuring out here where I want my cow to be on this panel, and I'm just going to add a little bit of blue into the background just so that it makes it look kind of like there is a sky behind him. He kind of covers most of it up, to be honest, and I did want it quite pale. I definitely could have gone darker with this, but I did want it to be fairly pale, so I'm using Mermaid Lagoon Distress ink and just adding a little bit of that into the inside portion of that frame. So just going in with a blending brush here, just adding a little bit of that, and then just kind of bringing back in that fence and the cow there so that I can see if I've got enough. And like I say, I did want it to be quite subtle, so I was quite happy with that. I'm then taking the diamond frames, using some liquid glue to stack them one on top of each other. So just lining those up as best as possible, and then I can pop the last one there on top. So it's 3 layers high. I could have used foam tape instead of having to cut all of the layers, but because I've got quite a few layers on my card, I thought it'd be quite nice to actually kind of stack these up instead. And then I'm just going to do the same thing for the fence here. And I just wanted 2 layers of the fence. And this does kind of get lost a little bit, but I did still like it in white. I tried it in with a few other colours and I wasn't quite happy, so I went back to the white. I want to have the cow holding the flower, and I thought the best way to do this was to actually bring in my craft knife and just cut around he's not a hand, it's a leg, but you know what I mean. Looks more like a hand because he's standing up, and I'm just going around that front area there of the front hand and so that I can kind of pop that away from the back piece, and then I can pop the flower inside, and it makes it look like he's actually holding it rather than it's kind of just hovering there in place. If you didn't want to do that, you definitely didn't need to, because I still think it looks nice if you just kind of have it over the top, but I think that extra little step does make a difference. I can now add some liquid glue onto the back of the diamond frame, and then I'm popping that down onto an A2 size white card base. So that's a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. I can bring in my T-square ruler, make sure that that is straight, and then once I'm happy I can press that down, and I'm just going to take a glass paperweight just to hold that down while the glue dries. And then I can add some glue into the centerpiece here, and then I can pop that inside. I have then stamped and heat embossed a sentiment from the "You Make Moo So Happy," and that happens to be the sentiment that I chose as well. I stamped that down onto some black licorice cardstock and heat embossed that with white embossing powder, and then I'm adding some foam tape onto either side of that where it overlaps onto the card base, and then the bit that is in the center I'm using some thin foam tape because the centerpiece has got an extra layer inside. It's all hopefully going to kind of end up being the one layer. I'm just adding a little bit of liquid glue on that, so then I can pop that down. I'm going to bring in my T-square ruler again, try and line that up as straight as possible. And I wasn't sure here whether I was going to have the ruler at the bottom of the sentiment or the top, and I ended up going at the top. But I did end up just accidentally kind of dropping this sentiment down onto my card. But because I've got that liquid glue on the back, I did have time to sort of wiggle it in place and get it as straight as possible. I can then add some liquid glue onto the back of the fence piece, and then I can pop that underneath the sentiment. I'm then adding some foam tape onto the back of the cow and the flower, and while I was adding this foam tape I made sure to overlap some of the foam tape onto either side because I didn't actually stick the flower onto the cow. I thought it'd be easier for me just to try and add some of that foam tape on the back to sort of make sure that they stay together. And then I can pop him down onto the card there, and I'm going to have it so that his foot is sort of just overhanging the sentiment, so it looks like he's standing on that sentiment. And that diamond really does bring your eye into the focal point. I think it would be nice without it, but it does just add something extra, especially onto a clean and simple card, and really kind of creates like a little mini scene on the card. I did need a little bit of extra foam tape behind the flower just to pop that up a little bit, and now I'm going in with a 0.8 white gel pen, adding 3 dots onto the center of that flower there. And then I did decide to add a couple of highlights onto the cow as well. I love it when people add loads of highlights onto the images, but for some reason I really struggle to do it, so I just went with the 2 today. I'm then adding some clear glaze pen into his nostrils, make them kind of look a little bit like they were wet, like a cow would have. And off camera I did add a little bit of a black glaze pen to his eyes as well, just to help them pop a little bit. And so that is the card finish for today. Really clean and simple, but I love, like I say, how that diamond shape really does just bring your eye into the focal point and creates that mini scene. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.